generated on scale?
Talk now. It's a cool.
It could be done statistically. I mean, 99 times out of 100, 99 times out of 100, there's a simple statistical check you can do to check for AI stuff. Um, and I noticed that there's like a lot of like coloration and stylized
Yeah.
consistency with a lot of mid-journey images. So I'd
Well,
imagine that would be something they could learn with a training set.
Yeah, but how do you distinguish that from me using an Instagram filter or something like that on my image?
Yeah, the hard part is, can it tell the original art apart from the AI art? Because it's going to flag all the original art as AI because it became mainstream.
Cool. Well, let's talk about this. This is another
I,
good.
I question, so I know, honey, you've discussed this, obviously, the AI detection. I question the ability of the AI detection. So several months ago, maybe even almost a year ago, I did a bunch of this person does not exist for test purposes only. And I ran them through, and I did use a couple different tools, actually. I ran them through AI checkers, and I found it varied wildly from image to image. Sometimes the images were considered, legitimate. Sometimes they were considered AI. I had one that came out and it was almost like the tools laughed at me, like this is obviously AI. And there was one where she's not even a real person, but there was one picture where she went through all of the checks as if it was, yep, this is really a real person, to the point where I was even beginning to question myself, did they give me a picture of a real person, or did they, is this just a really good AI picture?
Right.
And that was this person does not exist, which is, I would assume, is pretty basic AI, if it's even AI.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the point. Maybe because it's not AI, AI detectors can't find it. I don't know.
I think I would assume it combines, common features and then smooths them statistically. So, it's a plausible person.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of SEO Fight Club. We have a really interesting topic today. Google rewrote their SEO Starter guide, and it is not horrible. And so imagine that. Like, it's actually, in my opinion, I think it is Google's best work in SEO to date. All right. It is the most truthy SEO document I've ever seen them publish. They leaked a number of things that should probably be tested. Uh, and they took all of the bullshit Google talking points and they crammed it into one tiny section at the bottom. They didn't do that thing that they do throughout the entire document. And so I think it's remarkable personally. And they're threatening to do the same thing with the search quality raters guidelines. And I love it. Yes, please. Absolutely. So Charles and Lee didn't have any advance notice on today's topic. So they're coming in cold on this. But I wanted to pull out some screenshots from the guide, the SEO Starter guide, and talk about them. So, what do you guys think about today's topic?
I heard it was coming out, have not had a chance to read it, so I'm intrigued just like everybody else.
All right, and as always, we'll try to get to some question and answers at the end. And I've gotten feedback from the audience that people are getting a little tired of the repetitive nature of the Q&A episodes where it's 100% Q&A. So we will try to put in a little bit of a better mix. So getting some topic days, getting some tactical lessons thrown into the mix a bit more. We hear you. And we appreciate the feedback. So if you have suggestions on topics you'd like to hear about, go ahead and leave them in the YouTube video comments. Not in the chat here, because after the episode airs, the chat's invisible largely. But yeah, let us know in the YouTube comments if there are topics you'd like us to dive deeper into. With that said, let's get into it. So Magic PR, pretty awesome press release service. I use it myself. It's one of 3 I use. Well, if it's so good, Ted, why do you use 3? Because I'm largely doing SEO. I'm not a Fortune 1000 trying to announce things to the public. So there are different use cases. And as an SEO, I'm trying to fix a number. I'm trying to fix referring domains. Because for off page, it's the smallest number, the fastest number, the safest number, the cheapest number. And so I like that aspect. Like, those things, they check all the right boxes for off page for me. And when done properly and used sparingly, I managed to get good results with them using my methodologies. So Magic PR is one of the 3 I use to achieve the numbers I need to get, because if you use the same one 3 times, it's different numbers than using 3 different ones once. So take it as you will. All right. Let's see. Next one. Tested SEO training. Is it too late to get in, Lee?
It's close. It's close. We're, the group opens up tomorrow. The first training is a week from tomorrow. So if you're at all interested, you need to hit me up on Skype and schedule a time. And right now, Honey and I are in Las Vegas. So we're leaving after this show to head back. So we'll be driving over the next couple of days. So, it'll be a little bit before I respond to you. But if you're interested, hit me up.
All right, last chance. Otherwise, you're probably waiting months. All right. SEO spring training coming up quickly. If you haven't heard about it, climb out from under your rock once in a while, get some sunshine. It's in Arizona. Great place for sunshine. If you're looking for a rock to climb under, Arizona's also good for that.
A lot of rocks.
SEO at the Beach is coming in early March. That's Mike Merlino's big event, him and Brock Meisner. They do an awesome event as well. So if you're looking for some Florida sun, you have some choice. They're both great events. All right, so to our topic.
Hey, Ted, can I give a quick PSA first? A little
Sure.
SEO PSA. For those of you who are aware of the Google search status dashboard, where Google alerts folks as to what's going on, they sometimes tell the truth. And they've been telling the truth for a couple days now, for a week now, that there was an indexing issue. And the indexing issue for the past 4 days is it's been mitigated, but we're waiting for their system to become stable. So in my mind, that means there's still an indexing issue. So if you are, if you're running any sites, if you're in the middle of a migration like I am, and you have problems with indexing, it might not be anything you're doing. It might be what's going on with Google. So again, I recommend everybody keep an eye on the Google search status dashboard whenever you can. And they don't update it often, but when they do, it can definitely be aware of it.
Yeah, we're waiting for the system to stabilize. Feels like fingers crossed, people. Fingers crossed.
They've been saying that they claimed they fixed it on the 1st, and then on the 2nd it's marking indexing has been mitigated. The issue with indexing has been mitigated. Our system is becoming stable, and that's been they've updated that on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. So, I guess that means their system's not stable. I mean, that's.
Yeah, one of my I'll just say this, one of my large sites, that I track to see, the crawls and stuff like that. After February 1st, the new content wasn't crawled until actually this morning, February 6th, but everything got crawled this morning. So whatever they're doing, it's a recrawl, reprocess, and then if it all works the way that they hope it works, then we're back online. Otherwise, they'll be going, well, there's a bug. And sometimes they'll put that in search status, and sometimes it's just SEOs will go, no, it's not happening. So we'll wait and see.
Yeah, in the standard Google fashion, they don't give any indication as to the scope of this problem. I actually launched a test on late Friday night. I've already got pages, test pages. We're indexing within Saturday afternoon. So whatever's going on, I don't know, but it's not affecting my stupid little test pages, test sites. So
yeah.
Sorry, Ted, I just want to throw that out there.
No, thank you. That's a great announcement. So be aware that it might take a bit longer than you're expecting to get indexed right now. So I've heard a lot of people saying that. So it's kind of like the anecdotal stories from the field kind of match the announcement. So yeah. All right. So Google's search engine optimization starter guide. All right. They had this before, but it was longer. And in past documents, like the past version and previous incarnations of such content from Google Search Central, in my opinion, just my opinion here, was largely filled with anti-SEO propaganda and plausibility, deniability attempts. You know, those types of things where they try to throw you off the trail of what the algorithm does, and they say that SEO bad and that kind of thing, SEO dumb, SEO stupid, and is propaganda pieces. And so this particular document is different. There is propaganda in it, but it looks like they largely confined it to one section way down at the bottom. It's like they're like, okay, we have to put the propaganda in. We'll put it in one small part down at the bottom, and we'll just kind of dump the propaganda right there, and that's it. And then the rest of the document is remarkable. I couldn't put it down. It was a page turner. It's uh, and so they're threatening to do the same thing to the search quality raters guidelines. Yes, please. And what's remarkable is you can actually go through what Google believes about SEO from this document and itemize it. And you can go side by side with your beliefs on these topics and see where you agree or disagree. And for the first time ever, it feels like there is more agree than disagree in this document for myself. So I'm excited to show you guys. So, all right, let's look at one.
Ted, I assume the part that you consider propaganda is the things we believe you shouldn't focus on.
You found the section.
Yeah. I was actually talking with a few folks about that yesterday. We were going through it. I'm like, okay, well, that means that works. And
all right, so this section, how long until I see impact in search results? And they say some changes might take effect in a few hours, others could take several months. You likely want to wait a few weeks to assess whether your work had beneficial effects in Google search results. How long have we been saying, hey, if it works right away, great, continue? But if it stays the same or goes down, you have to wait a couple weeks. Like we've been saying that in the SEO side for years, at least 6 years. And now they're coming out and agreeing with it. And they dropped a nugget here. Which changes take effect in a few hours? All right, game is on. Let's identify the hourly changes. All right, so we need to make a list if that's true. We need to find it if that's true, because hourly changes, man, we've been talking minimum viable SEO. Hourly changes, fascinating. That might be a fast path into search if you understand those pieces. Hourly changes.
It's an interesting one, but you have to put an asterisk by that, going back to what Charles was talking about. If you have an indexation problem right now, how many hourly changes are there unless you're, one of the prize seed enterprise sites?
Agreed. When they're broken, when they have massive updates rolling out. But the other 60% of the time, Hourly changes. It's still worth investigation. I want to know what's on that list. That would be a remarkable list to know what are the things that update hourly and how do they work. So yeah, I thought that was the first big drop right there.
Mhm.
All right. In the section help Google find your content, check if Google has already found your content. And what they're talking about here is doing a diagnostic query to figure out the status of your pages in their ecosystem. And I have had massive debates with people over how do you determine what is indexed and what is not, and is awareness of the URL or searching for the URL, does that constitute indexation? And Google has come out and is talking on this topic, this very debate that is unresolved in SEO today. They are chiming in with a position. That is remarkable to me. I love it. And so they're saying the site search operator checks for index pages. So your pages that show up when using the site operator, they deem as indexed.
Mhm.
And that makes sense. And that is different from a URL search.
It is, but Google's terminology around this, indexed versus served. Indexed is kind of what we think about in terms of the link graph. They know about it. It's in there, somewhere. It may not be showing up for any sort of keyword, but they know about it. And this, may be consistent with that, because I haven't seen any research that says that, things that pop up in the site search operator are also findable by keyword or not findable by keyword or served in Google's language.
Yeah, yeah. And we do diagnostic queries with site search and keywords to even figure out, like, is it the most relevant page on a site?
Mhm.
But yeah, the fact that they even chimed in on this is remarkable.
Mhm.
You're right. Trust but verify. We
Yeah.
need to test here. We need more investigation. But they actually put an opinion on this issue and they recommended a diagnostic query.
I'm just happy they're acknowledging that operator still works. Because I know
Yeah.
the slowly over time, all these operators have just been, kind of disappearing, and then people they'll come out and say, "Oh, that operator, yeah, that hasn't worked for 5 years," or something along those lines. And I'm just really happy to see they're acknowledging the site colon command, and it still seems to work, and they're recommending it. So that's
Yeah.
cool.
I
That's good
I
information.
Yeah, I use diagnostic queries like this all the time. And, I have a palette of them that I go to. And so the fact that they're recommending a diagnostic query, brilliant. Yes. More, please. I wish they would have given more examples. That would have been great.
To tie two other things together, and kind of on Lee's point about ranking versus indexing, and to tie into that whole Google search status dashboard I was talking about earlier, in that it mentions crawling, indexing, ranking, serving. So the site colon command, is that just the indexing level? And if it is, that's good. We need to know if it's indexing, but just because you're indexing doesn't mean you're going to
Well,
rank, and it doesn't
and
mean you're necessarily going to get served.
and that was kind of my point in the age-old debate, was that when you request indexing, your URL becomes findable on a very short notice. So you go and search the URL, and it's like, okay, that's more of an indicator of awareness or in queue or something like that. And so that's always been my stance on that, is that searching for the URL isn't the best indicator of index status, but these other diagnostic queries are. But yeah, there needs to be a lot more research in this area.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. The other piece that pops up with that, like other Google data, does the site colon, is it real time? Is it delayed, in a different process? Is it sampled data like Search Console data? I mean, there's a lot. If I don't see a certain page in the site colon, does that mean it's not in the index? Or does it mean just you're showing me just
and
a sample?
And how does site colon line up with search console status?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suspect site colon changes based upon what data center you're hitting. I say this because when I do, so I'm in the middle of a migration right this second. I go and I do a site colon on certain category pages I want to move, and that number sometimes moves around wildly within a day, like by thousands. And there's the only way that could be happening. I don't think their database is changing. I think I'm hitting different data centers.
That could be.
Yeah.
All right. So here they're talking about silos, and they say it can be good to organize it in a logical way because it can help. And continues, but don't drop everything to start reorganizing your site right now. They're saying search engines will likely understand your pages as they are, regardless of how your site is organized. So they're largely saying that bigger sites need to care more about silo structure. And I've often been saying, I don't think silos are worth it for smaller sites. And so they're kind of largely agreeing with that sentiment here. So I thought that was fascinating that they came out and talked about that. And they talked about both sides. They specifically call out, especially if you're working on a larger website. So agree.
And I read this as physical silos, not logical silos. So having all of your pages at the root, I read this as being potentially not the best. So you want things in a physical directory.
Yeah, and they go on that more in a different section, and we'll get to that too. But yes.
There was a Google recently, they maybe a couple months ago, that Google came out with this wasn't under the thing about site safe search, but in the video and in the definition of site search, they made a call out about putting content in certain directories. And if you had stuff that might be considered, I guess NSFW, not safe for work, put it in its own directory. And that was a couple months ago, I guess, and that kind of piqued up my antenna. It's like, is Google segmenting large sites? Is it trying to figure out what the different parts are? Does this have anything to do with helpful content? Is it something they've always done? I don't know, but it's kind of guided a few of my decisions since then.
Yep, absolutely. And they speak to that more too in this document. Yo, Kyle Roof. You got called out by name in the SEO Starter Guide. They ranked some lorem ipsum in the example. I can't believe they did that. I mean, that had to be an honorable mention, or it's a massive oversight on their part. But I thought that was hilarious. All right, so Google learns breadcrumbs automatically based on the words in the URL, but you can also influence them with structured data. So they're talking about the importance of keywords in URLs. Hello, one of the earliest Cora factors we ever measured. And they're calling it out by name as a factor that they process. There is no ambiguity here that they are processing keywords in your URLs. So if you are not using keywords in your URLs, you are using one less ranking signal than people who are. And we always talked about the synergy between having a target keyword in a URL, in the title, in the meta description, in the headings, and in your content. And having that agreement topically in all those hot zones is kind of like a gestalt factor that is larger than the sum of the parts. And so that's been, at least 6 years, if not 15 years old. So here they are calling it out and telling you that's how it works. So amazing.
Not new, but but thank you for confirming.
All right, back to what Charles was saying. They're talking about folders. So in the debate of subdomains versus folders, it's really hard to have subdomains. I mean, I suppose you can do it, but it's difficult to go subdomains, much easier to go sub folder. So I would lean that this type of advice for larger websites kind of indicates that folders kind of wins because you can do better nesting and grouping. And the other thing, the thing they really point out here is that, again, large websites, less important with small ones. If you have more than a few thousand URLs, you want to do this. So at some point, there's a point where it matters more for bigger sites than smaller. And we have to probably figure out where that threshold is. But then they go on to say that the content and policies seldom changes, but the content in the promotions folder likely changes very often, and Google can figure that out and treat them differently.
Mhm.
All right. So they're talking about a capability there, a testable, verifiable capability, because we can look at our weblogs for directories where content changes often versus directories where content never changes, and we ought to see googlebot frequencies differ in those directories for legacy data that is already in our weblogs. This is verifiable if you have weblogs.
I don't think we have to test this one because I know a guy that has an enterprise site that looks at his logs a
I
lot.
know, that's why I'm dropping the hint about the weblogs.
So, Charles, if you're looking at, Fox and, the things like breaking news and, those sort of things, those sort of pages, do they get crawled more frequently than, some of your other pages?
It's actually hard to parse out because they hit us like crazy. Like Google hits us like crazy, but I'm going to be looking at a few things this afternoon for sure.
Excellent.
Awesome. Duplicate content. They call out that having duplicate content is not a spam violation. So, but they do mention that it wastes crawling resources. So it's inefficient for your crawl budget, and at scale, that could impact your ability to get your whole site updated in search. So if you have an infinite crawl, then Googlebot will spend all of its budget in one category and get in that infinite loop, and then it'll quit and say, well, we'll come back next month. And then you only got 5% of your site index because of an infinite crawl. So that's kind of what they're alluding to here, is you got to be careful about duplicate content, but you're shooting yourself in the foot. They're not punishing you for it.
Well, I'm going to throw out some tinfoil because, we do that. So I'm looking at the bad user experience piece, and it intrigues me because the helpful content was where Google first came out and started talking about site level indicators rather than page level indicators. And so, duplicate content, while it's not a violation, can be used as a user experience indicator. Thinking that the user, bouncing around the pages of your site, if they encounter different URLs with the same content, it might not be great. So your site might not be as worthy higher rankings as somebody else that doesn't have this issue. Also a testable thing.
It's interesting because I know that online retailers that do encounter infinite crawls on their site do complain about systematic site-wide demotion and search. And it's not like they're saying, oh, well, all of my categories except for socks fell. They're saying all my categories fell. And so, there's some plausibility in that argument that probably needs more research, because if it was just the ones that weren't getting updated, then the complaint would be all my categories except socks. Socks went way up, but all my other categories died. And that's not what these retailers are saying. They're saying site-wide, we vanished.
And we see in a sister system, which is we see cannibalization, sites that have pages that cannibalize each other a lot. When you have a certain threshold, they seem to suffer a ranking demotion. And when you fix those cannibalization issues, you take all the pages, they're not necessarily even duplicates. Some people will go old school and they'll write a page about, Seattle plumber, and they'll write another page about plumber Seattle because they're different keywords, or, some people's thought, and they will be different content, but they're fighting each other for the same pool of keywords. And it seems like neither of those pages, or, a lot of the pages on the sites won't rank well. And if you fix those, then it restores that. So because we're seeing that anecdotally, I kind of buy the plausibility of a bad user experience indicator.
Yeah, I'd say the data probably supports it, but probably more research is needed.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely tinfoil.
Avoid distracting advertisements. As you can see from the graphic, ads, AI ads, content. Nailed it. All right, Google, we'd like you to follow your own advice if you recommend we should follow it too. Because if you can't do it, your expectation for us to be any different is flat out crazy. So, if this one is real, let's see you go first.
It's an intriguing thing, this one, because we had noticed on a number of our sites that, new sites never had any sort of ads or AdSense or anything else, that sometimes Google will come looking for the ads.txt file, because you'll see it in the 404s, that it wasn't found in its googlebot looking for it. And I'm like, why are you looking for an ads file? It's an intriguing thing, because it seemed like back the spring of 23, we started to see that periodically on sites that had, no history of ads. So they're looking at it for some reason.
Yep. And I'm not saying that they aren't acting on it either, but boy, is it ever hypocritical that they don't follow their own advice.
Yeah.
Should we define, Lee, what the ads.txt file is? I'm assuming a lot of people may not know necessarily what the file does.
Yeah, it's a file that, when you're using AdSense or, any sort of systematic advertising, just sort of lays that out. It's one of the ones that they look at. It's, sets of permissions and things like that for it. So, it's there for those, but, Googlebot coming and saying, hey, let me see your ads. It's not anywhere in your sitemap. It's not anywhere, in your content or anywhere else. Google just came looking for it, randomly, which means that there's a reason for it.
I wonder if you should have a blank one like robots.txt, where Google kind of freaks out if you don't play ball on it.
Could be another one of those quality indicators, but I can't see that being it would be weird as a quality indicator, unless it's a negative quality indicator. If you have one, we're assuming your page looks like our search results with ads everywhere.
That sounds like we need a test.
I've always thought of it like the robots.txt, where it's a file Google knows should exist at the root. We'll look and see if it's there, but I've assumed it doesn't care. But that's a really good point. Maybe it does care. Maybe you're sending a signal one way or the other by having it or not having it.
Yeah, Google gets very weird when you're robots.txt is a 404. And so I just recommend people have a blank file instead. So yeah, if they are doing a rules-based thing, I would imagine they probably suffer the same bug, possibly.
So one thing I have learned over the years is when Google, when you'll often hear people say, well, Google says this or Google said that. And I always say, well, what do you mean Google says it? And they'll often say, well, I heard Gary say this at a conference or John said this on Twitter. And when I hear that, I'm like, okay, I actually ignore it completely. But when Google has documentation, like black and white written documentation, like we're looking at now, take it very seriously because this went through multiple layers of the organization. Someone didn't just, I'm going to help out people a little bit and throw this out there. So my point is on ads.txt, you can Google ads.txt. You'll find the Google document about it. And in their document, they said use of ads.txt is not mandatory, comma, but it is highly recommended. When Google says something is highly recommended, do it.
But I think in some conversations that I've had with SEOs, including you, Charles, you and I have talked about this a little bit. Are the ads on a page considered part of your text because they are unique content in the page? So if I have, if I'm Fox and I have a 400 word, quick little article today, breaking news, this thing's happening, we'll update this later, and then I have 1,500 words that are in my ads. Is it diluting the relevance of the page? Or there's certain types of ads that Google can distinguish, oh, that's ad content versus page content. That may be what's going on here, is that they may be saying simply that sometimes we can't tell, and so it may be affecting your SEO. So because they did define googlebot as one of the users of your site and your content.
Yep. Link to relevant resources. And I thought this was an interesting spin on trust. Additionally, links can also add value by connecting users and Google to another resource that corroborates what you're writing about. Your outbound links as a trust signal to verify your fact checking. And if you wanted to write an AI fact checker, you would basically get the article text, you would get the citations, and then you would say, do the citations corroborate what's said in the article? And which parts yes, which parts no. So mechanically, from an engineering standpoint, this idea has legs if you're doing automated fact checking. And if Google likes pages that cite their sources and their sources corroborate their claims, that's interesting. Now, is Google doing this? Probably not. Way too expensive to do to 200 trillion pages. But probably not too expensive to do for top 3 results in the index. Like that pool of pages is small enough to probably run a process like this. So if you wanted to fact check the top 3 results for all keywords with volume above X, could be engineered. I don't know that they're doing that, but this call out, it's like interesting. So more testing needed. Citation links that echo your talking points might be a trust factor. We know Google loves agreement and local. So when your business profile claims things that your website talks about, that your schema mentions, that your reviews comment on, and that third-party websites list you for, that type of agreement helps you in local. So we know Google has systems that look for agreement across different sources. So this is very similar to what they would have already in local. And if they could do it for local, They could do it for the top 3 results. And that's similar scale. I don't know. Any thoughts on this tinfoil?
Yeah, I think, this has been around for a long time. It used to be, oh, link out to an authority site like Wikipedia. And then for a while it looked like that worked like gangbusters. And then it looked like it didn't work at all, or possibly might even be a little bit of a negative, or, whatever. So this has been theorized and whispered, for a while, but, I haven't seen any tested data on this.
The reason I like this area of theory crafting, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm not specifying fact. I'm theory crafting based on what they said in their official documentation. The reason I like this area is because the T in eat has been so poorly defined. And this is a connection point where you can empirically measure and quantify, especially with AI language models, like totally achievable to fact check. This document based on these cited sources, what facts are corroborated, what facts aren't. Like, large language models can do that work. And so there's an engineering path to fact checking if you cite sources for your claims. And so that's an engineerable, quantifiable T value. So yeah, I think it's interesting. A lot of research needed here. Definitely tinfoil. Fascinating.
Let's assume that it's true for a moment. It also gives you, an exploit into misinformation.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Because I can have, 10 sites that are all, about how Ted Kubaitis beats unicorns in his spare time, so whatever it is. And if I have them all link in particular ways back and forth, and they're all, larger sites, like that, does it become a fact because I've repeated it and linked back and forth between independent domains?
Yeah, the frustrating part of this theory craft is that we can't test it with little sites, most likely, because it's probably too expensive for no traffic keywords.
Right.
It would probably take somebody in Charles's situation to prove this is happening.
Maybe, because you could also get, minor facts. You could get somebody like, could I say that, Lee Witcher's married to, pick celebrity X or something like that.
There's no volume. They're not going to do it to all 200 trillion pages. So you would actually need a page that has some traffic to justify the expense of fact checking it. And so that's the part where it dethrones us SEO testers, because we're not going to have a high traffic site that warrants fact checking.
Charles will throw us a homepage link. We'll test it. That's fine.
Yeah.
So Ted, I've thought in the past as well, like, hey, maybe Google's doing higher level verifications on the whatever ranks in the top 3 or 5 positions or whatever. But I think it still runs into a potential scale problem where that's a lot, so let's just take, all right, so Google checks, and let's just say they only do like your money or your life stuff. So your money or life stuff, and they check, let's take something big like the cure for COVID. And, the top 3 rankers for the cure for COVID, what do they link to? But then now Google has to start saying, well, are those sources trustworthy? And Google's come right out and said, we're not the arbiter of what is correct and what is not correct.
Yeah.
I wonder if they've gone down this road and it's just been a disaster for them. They're just like, you know what, forget it. We're not doing this. We can't do it. Or they tried it and it wasn't working.
Agreed. It's highly probable that Google is not doing this. But I'm just stating that, from an engineering standpoint, it's technically possible to engineer a fact-checking system that would behave like this. And so, yeah, I just find it fascinating that they put it in documentation, and what does that mean? All right, write a good text link. We've talked about making use of relevant anchors, so they came out and said it too. Search engines can easily understand what your linked pages contain before they visit, and I would assume that the URL has those signals as well. So keywords in the URL, keywords in the anchor. And it would not surprise me if Google evaluates criteria based on the URL and anchor text for priority crawling. So, will they visit a URL that looks to be the same information over one that has different information? If they see that privacy policy, is that a priority crawl item, or is that a transactional one that they do weekly or monthly? You know, it wouldn't shock me if there is some sort of rules engine saying, we'll crawl these links, but we're not so interested in these links. Now the question becomes, can we prove it? Can we put up a new website with a bunch of different links and say, well, what happens in the crawl? What if and here would be the challenge. What if every page had a unique URL for the privacy policy, but shared the same anchor text? Does Google ignore the privacy policy with different URLs after visiting it once from the homepage? So it's testable. Like you could set up a test to see if Google is actually acting on anchor text in some sort of crawl preference. Thoughts on this, tinfoil?
You know, if they're saying that appropriate anchor text lets them understand what your page is before they visit, that means that bad anchor text is a problem. That's, you know, and we've known that to a degree, but they're kind of just dropping it there and saying, hey, you know, make it relevant.
Yeah, agreed. So if it's beneficial to humans to know what they're getting when they click, maybe they will click. Versus the classic example of anchor text that says click here. You know, the call to action anchor text like that, where you don't know what you're gonna get when you do. All right, almost done with these. So now we're to the propaganda place. So I largely agree with minimum, maximum content length. You can win with skyscrapers. You can win with keyword density. You can really pick your path on that. Duplicate content penalty. I largely agree. It's not a penalty. It's just a waste of resources that can hurt you in the end, but it's not like Google is punishing you. It's you're finding out that you're shooting yourself in the foot. Meta keywords, they don't use as a factor. I agree. I disagree on keyword stuffing. That still appears to work great. Keywords in the domain name, we put that at about a 10 or 15% advantage, so we disagree with them on that. And even they say that URL path is something they process and use in search results. So they kind of disagree with themselves within this own document on that. Subdomains versus subdirectories, you know, I kind of agree, but I think it really favors subdirectories. When you get down into it, it's just you can nest them deeper than you can subdomains. And if you're trying to create logical silos, it's just easier to do in folders. Let's see, page rank, you know, backlinks are still important. And I thought it was interesting that they really doubled down this week that EAT is not a factor. So for some reason, they are very adamant about this is not something you tune for, which I don't know. I thought that was their goal. You know, their past propaganda said it's all about the quality and trustworthiness of your content, right?
But I think the way that they set up the quality raters guidelines is say, we have humans evaluate these pages and see if our models did a good job the way the human does. It's not saying that the models are built to evaluate like the humans, because some of that stuff isn't, it's how do you determine that Ted Kubaitis is an expert in, unicorn wrangling and Charles isn't? How would you establish that if the two of them wrote articles
Well,
about?
let's get some unicorns and see how Charles does.
Okay,
You're
well,
going down.
next episode, baby, in the field.
Yeah. I agree, but it was amazing that they called out one of their own creations
Yeah.
in the propaganda section.
Which is also interesting because of how much of the white hat community says you've got to write for this and this is how you solve for this and so forth. And they're going, it's not a thing. Now, them saying it's not a thing because of me being me, I'm thinking, wait, is it a thing? Because they're saying it's not a thing. So, now I kind of want to go test some of see if we can figure out some ways to test these, whereas largely I've ignored this forever.
The 2 points I would make about this is, once, again, I like to parse words whenever I look at Google, and they say it's not a ranking factor. Well, we know that they have 4 levels. They have crawling, indexing, ranking, and serving. So it might not be a ranking factor, but maybe it's a serving factor. Maybe it's a crawling or indexing factor. The second thing I would say is, the way I've always explained it to folks is, I'd say, let's imagine Lee and I go to a restaurant, we look through the menu, and I show him all the things that I like to eat. Like, oh, I like to eat this, I like to eat this, I don't like to eat that. Lee should then be able to create a set of rules and give it to Ted, and Ted should then have a pretty good idea of what it is I like to eat. And I think that's what I always assumed the eat ranking factors were, is people were saying, this is a good page, this is not a good page. And then the developers would then look at those results and say, all right, well, what do these pages have in common that are good, or what do these pages have in common that are considered poor, and how do we parse that out? And that's how you get some of these factors that we've come up with over the years, or SIA has tested or whatnot, where it's you've got to give these qualitative results to a computer that only thinks in ones and zeros. So that's the other way I always look at it. But with my tinfoil hat on, they are saying ranking factor, and they're not saying indexing, crawling, or serving. And I know those are terms they use. So
Good point. And then finally, last slide here, they're planning on doing the same operation to the quality raters guidelines. And I'm like, yes, please, more. It'll be interesting. Let me know in the chat. Do you think that this is Google's best work on SEO content to date? I wonder if you agree with me or not on that. I found it fascinating. Once I started reading this document, I could not put it down until I got to the end. And I've never seen Google SEO content have that effect on me before. So after seeing some of what's in there, how do you guys feel about it? What are your thoughts?
Charles, you want to go first?
yeah, I've always said to folks, I've said, Google could come out and give us, hey, these are the 100 things we look at on a website. We look at the title, we look at the description, we look at the headlines, we look at the body content, we look at the URL. Like, they could just go straight up and say, these are the things we look at. And honestly, I don't think it would change anything. I always thought it was weird that Google was afraid to talk about what ranks a page and what doesn't rank a page, because like looking at all this information is great, but it's not changing really how I do that much. Other than that, there's a few things here that I can go to other people and say, see what I've been saying for years now, please do this. So while it's great information, I think Google should do this. I think being as transparent as possible is a good thing. I would hope this doesn't radically change how anyone's doing their SEO.
Well, I think it radically changes the argument out in the public, because while Google is publishing propaganda pieces, I can say publicly, well, if Google advice worked, we wouldn't need SEOs. And
That's
if
true.
Google advice worked, you'd be ranking by now.
Mhm.
So when Google starts adopting our talking points, we can no longer make those claims, right? So if they go further down this path and adopting actual SEO best practices, then we can't criticize them for doing what we ourselves recommend. So I think it's interesting in the propaganda side of things.
As a as a tester, we've always been looking at the stuff and saying, that's not true, or that's a half truth, or and there's even elements that, I mean, when Charles was saying, it may not be a ranking factor, doesn't mean it's not an indexing or crawling factor. And it's like, yeah, that is true, because we've seen Google make those sort of things before. I think what's interesting about this is that I think it's been clearer. I think that there has been less controversial statements in there, saying, hey, you know what? Get your keyword in your title tag, get in the URL. Okay, we know, and it's confirming some of those things, but it didn't really bring up anything of depth in there. I'll have to agree with Charles on that. It's like I don't see anything that's going to change because of that, other than now, that they're saying eat's not a thing. I'm like, is it? Because of so much history of them saying stuff and it, being partially true. So I like the clarity of it, but is it all that helpful? Is it going to change the way, people new or existing SEOs handle their sites? I'm not sure.
Well,
Yeah, I
I
love the
think
clarity. Keep it coming, Google. Clarity is good.
I think to your point, Lee, it's going to depend on the tests we do.
Mhm.
So there are testable things there, and what we discover and learn from those tests, that's what can cause change.
Yeah.
But yeah, but there were a lot of testable things in there. There's a lot of little nugget drops of this is a system in Google, or this is how a part of the system functions. And there's lots of little nugget drops in there that are test worthy.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
there's also not a lot of people talking about, Google as a system of systems. Like Charles, might come back later and say, you know what, it's not a ranking factor, but it is a crawling factor. It is an indexing factor, and those, completely do, and they're relevant, they're worthwhile, and still do not refute, Google's, statements, because they're technically accurate, although incomplete.
and system of systems, I feel, was like kind of throughout this document, like in the part that Charles pointed out, as well as the part that, some things can some content can be updated in hours, and some content takes months to update. That's a system of systems claim. Those are different pipelines of processing. Yeah, I mean, just tons of little tiny reveals in this, and I liked it. I thought it was awesome. And it is only a starter guide, so obviously it's not advanced SEO, but for a starter guide, there's a lot of reveals in it. So, all right, let's look at a few questions.
Gentlemen, I have to go because I have to check out of my room here momentarily. So
Okay.
I will see you guys next week.
Safe
See you
travels.
then, Lee.
Bye-bye.
Let me stop presenting. All right, and let's pull up the YouTube chat, and I will put it on live chat to see all messages, not that mistake I make where I only see top ones. And I don't know that we can get to all of these, but we'll do our best to do as many as we can. I sell cars online. How do I handle the internal competition between new and used cars? For example, new BMW versus used BMW. Honestly, my recommendation has always been that if you have uh, segments like that that compete on the same keywords, that you break them up into two websites so you can rank side by side in search results instead of having one category cannibalize the other category. So if you have, Mark's Toyota.com, have Mark's used Toyota.com, and then you have two websites and you take more of page one instead of having cannibalization. Any thoughts on that, Charles?
No, I like that. That's a good way of approaching it. I'd have to think about it really more to come up with a good strategy for them.
Because effectively you're having largely the same keywords.
Yeah.
When building links to my Google map, what page should I build my links to? And that's really in a vacuum. I don't know enough about the problem you're trying to solve. In general, I tend to prefer building links to pages I'm trying to rank. But yeah, I don't understand what you're asking.
They may be getting into building, like, do you link to the CID or to manipulate URL? I would caution people to be careful about building links. That's something that's happened a lot. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it can get you into trouble. Google knows that people are doing these kinds of things. Just be careful. I'd also say just building links isn't enough if you're really trying to go hardcore with local. There's going to have to be, when you're trying to push things, just building links is going to be enough. You're going to have to be pushing traffic, but then definitely be careful what you're pushing traffic to. So, my advice would be tread very carefully and listen to Ted, link to things you want to rank.
How would you optimize a product page to rank? All right, so very quickly, e-com SEO in a nutshell. It all starts with targeting. If the keyword you're targeting is shit, you get nothing organically from it. When you use artistic product naming and you call it the majestic orange snuffler, you are basically denying SEO in all its forms. And what you actually need to do is call it what it is from an ambient findability standpoint. It is an orange silk scarf. That is what it is. That is what people search to find things like that. That is what you need to target for. If the targeting is wrong, the SEO is wrong by extension. So all SEO begins by evaluating the keyword targeting. Once you rank for a keyword, and you want to rank for a keyword that has search volume, so if you go too long tail, there's nothing to win if you win the keyword. If you go too short tail, you'll never win the keyword. So you got to find that winnable happy spot with search volume. So you have to do keyword research to make sure that all of your products are winnable and have a prize. All right, so you do that. Eventually, you get ranking for it. You need to expand your organic traffic from search, your broad match organic traffic. So if you ranked a hummingbird feeder, you can then pick up broad match traffic for blue hummingbird feeder, red hummingbird feeder, brass hummingbird feeder, glass hummingbird feeder food. Now, you have to be very close to what your ranked keyword is. It's still one keyword per page, but once you successfully rank for that one keyword, you get broad match traffic by mentioning all those closely related terms. And that's how, when you hear people say, oh, I rank for hundreds of keywords, I rank for thousands of keywords. No, they don't. They're not tuning for it. They're not doing that. They're just mentioning that closely knit topical cluster. And that's how that works. And those don't rank great, but they do get you broad match traffic. So step one, rank for a target keyword well. Step two, maximize broad match organic traffic. And then you go page by page, product by product, category by category, repeat that. Any thoughts on ecom, Charles?
Yeah, I was going to say that was kind of a broad question. I was going to refer them to the Google thing we just looked at, but no,
Yeah,
your response was perfect.
all right. Let's see. Is what Google displays on the SERP a ranking factor? It can be. So let's there are engineered factors and there are emergent factors, and Google doesn't acknowledge this, but it happens in complicated systems. So let's say that Google makes click-through rate hypothetically a factor. Then all of a sudden, things you do that influence click through rate become emergent ranking factors. So, saying the top 10 best plumbers in Seattle, Washington, like Yelp often does, that language might win the click. And if that language wins the click, then sentiment in title text becomes a ranking factor, even though Google's engineers did not specifically code it to be that way. They coded click through rate. And because of that, we see in other areas like the review stars, those things for products tend to win CTR. So online retailers want their stars in the search result. Why is that? Well, it wins click through rate. Well, if CTR is a ranking factor, then getting your review stars could be an emergent factor that Google didn't code specifically into the code. And so there are lots of things like that that we feel are emergent factors. Another way emergent factors come into play, if Google has a web spam training set and they're creating a classifier to give your page a score between 0 and 1, how spammy is it? Anything that makes you different from the web spam training set will be a tiny, weak, but beneficial ranking signal. And we see evidence of this around new technology launches. When the Apple Touch icon came into play, on large sites, doing it site wide had a small lift across the board. When HTML5 came out, if you were quick to adopt HTML5, it had a small site wide lift across the board. And then, a few months later, when everybody was doing it, it goes away. When HTTPS became popular to implement, it became a ranking factor for about 3-4 weeks, and then it went away. And so we think that those short duration ranking factors are things that are learned from training sets and artificial intelligence, those beneficial benefits. Any thoughts on any of that, Charles?
Nope, you covered it perfectly.
All right. I got to leave you some fuel to work with. Does href lang links send link juice? I do not know. I haven't tested. Will they boost? I suspect they will, because those tend to be normal links with an href lang attribute. But I haven't tested it specifically. I assume they will, but I don't technically know.
I've seen some field data on this actually. I don't, so we have to define what is link juice, but I will say that I've seen that the hreflang acts like a super canonical. There was a page on a website, high domain website, very high domain website, not one I manage right now. They had a non-dub version in their hreflang. They had a canonical, and the canonical was right, had the dub, but Google was indexing and displaying the non-dub version. As soon as we fixed the hreflang, and it was wrong in the hreflang, as soon as we fixed it, it was fine. So I don't know if that qualifies as link juice, but it does act like a canonical in some way. So be very careful when you're doing your hreflangs.
There you go. Ted, can you talk about your recent tests? Probably not today, but in the future. I'll definitely be sharing some of that information. Question for Lee. Lee is out. Sorry, have to wait till next week. So remember your question, ask it again. Any insights on the new wave of manual actions being taken? Seems to have started early January. I have not heard about this. It has been years since anyone has come to me with a manual action. So this is news to me. I'm interested to learn more, maybe chat in the YouTube chat. Hey guys, can't wait to hear your thoughts on the new guide. Well, you got it. Let's see. Check out the AI poisoning tool, Nightshade. I don't know that I want to poison AI. I kind of like it, honestly. But yeah, I'll look into that. Interesting category of tool. On the top SEO factors site, backlink factors all seem to be page level. How strong is domain authority compared to these page level factors? Well, I think Charles had the best answer in recent history on domain authority as a factor. Uh, you want to speak to that a bit, Charles?
Yeah, domain authority doesn't do anything. I'm joking, of course. Yeah. Um, so yeah, look, obviously, if you have a domain, if you have a large domain that's been around forever, you're going to have more authority. Things are going to rank better. It's not a magic, it certainly isn't a magic arrow or anything. We've had articles, and I know Ted, you've talked about this, where like Amazon products, like you have a thick, what is it, the thick trunk, but the narrow branches, where your individual pages don't have a lot of authority, but your domain does. Now you can boost up the authority of individual pages by including links. I've done that. Multiple companies, you put a link in the footer to a page, and that page starts doing much better. There have been some really cool studies done by, I'm drawing a complete blank by his name, but he just did a recent study, used to be with Moz, and he did the keywords that you would use. And his test was interesting because he suggested, and actually I think Clint just talked about it yesterday, actually, in his webinar. But the interesting thing is, don't keep using the same URL, same anchor text over and over again, because there does seem to be a diminishing returns. The value of a big domain or an old domain is that they have a lot of signals to send. So a 5-page website has 5 internal links to send, whereas a major site, New York Times, CNN, Fox News, we have hundreds of thousands of links to send from the footer. So that's right there. That's why it's more important than another. An old domain is valuable because it has years and years of link data and link graph to call on, whereas a brand new domain doesn't have anything. So Google doesn't know how to value it. So that's kind of how I would look at it. I wouldn't fret if you don't have an old domain. I wouldn't spend thousands and thousands of dollars on old domains. Maybe. Yeah, I take that back. Maybe it depends. But
Well, if you have a small website, if it's not a massive scale project, I don't think you need to worry about domain authority all that much. The page level signals are largely what's going to get you across the finish line.
yeah, I would agree.
Business growth ready says White Star Line. We are waiting for systems to stabilize on one of our ships in the water. So that's referring to the Google issues, maybe? Yeah, I'm not sure.
Sounds like clever spam.
All right.
Or code.
Hourly changes is for local SEO. That's interesting. Yeah, Google didn't specify which search channel. We always assume organic web search, but they might imply different search engines that they meta blend into universal search. And that's a point we didn't bring up. So that's a really good call out.
I would assume the news, the top stories widget on Google. I mean, obviously I know that because I'm in the news business, but that's got to be an hourly. I've seen things change within minutes, so it's
I'm
definitely like that.
I'm really curious, like my area of interest is, are there hourly changes possible for organic web search? Like, is that a thing in any way, shape, or form? let's see, title tags can update fast as well, so there's a good area to test. Hourly changes probably be title tags and updated dates, so some theory crafting happening here. I love it. Let's see, SEO split, express fast food SEO equals hourly or marinated slow roast SEO. I'm not sure I understand.
That comment made
Um,
me hungry.
yeah, it's lunchtime. Do press releases lead indirectly to do follow links? I don't care about do follow status. I'll take all no follows. That's fine. I rank pages with no follows. Totally works. Long live the legend of Kyle. Yeah, I couldn't believe when I saw lorem ipsum in the example SERP. It's like, did you actually rank a lorem ipsum page in your example? That's hilarious. All right, sub domains. Here we go. Yeah. No, I'm not doing that. That's a pain in the ass. All right, good day from cloudy Arizona. So that's richest domains. Sorry late. Perplexity has me perplexed. Thought I was pro. Well, if you're talking about prompting, I just use an off-the-shelf Perplexity prompt. I have it in my Stream Deck as a button. I use it so much. Perplexity me, boom, and it writes it out in there. And FYI, those Stream Decks, they're awesome if you do a ton of work in ChatGPT, because you can have buttons for templates and prompts you use often. It'll automatically type them in, and you can organize folders of prompts in your Stream Deck. So I actually use the Stream Deck more for ChatGPT than for streaming. All right, so where were we? WordPress creates duplicate page URLs with different parameters, but no way to exclude them from search. You can specify the URL strategy that will hopefully minimize the parameter usage in the settings, and then your canonical is how you fix it, where you ultimately can't. So get strict about the canonical. New Cora factor measurement idea. Does website have ads.text or not? Yeah, it'd be good to correlate that with rankings. Absolutely. I'll put it on the list. Lee wins the unicorn debate, so another Lee fan. Yes, surprisingly, it's more informative from them. So talking about the overall doc, let's see if we can find questions here. Do you feel these guidelines might change when SGE is finally widely released? Well, on the slide where it said to not clutter your page with ads, I showed a screenshot where there was an SGE response that contained more ads. So Google is already using it to drive ad revenue with screen real estate. So I thought that was fascinating right there, that it was an AI ad spot. The keyword I used on that, if you want to go investigate it more, was sterling silver amethyst bracelet. Was the keyword I used. I just wanted something ecom that I was familiar with, and that was a good ecom term. Let's see. Business growth ready wants Lee to steal the towels on his way out the door. JM3, I'm having trouble tracking what changes are causing improvements. For example, if I obtain a link but made on-page changes, how can I track tasks and know what to expect from the changes? You got to get more scientific, right? You got to control the variables. So if you have 10 pages to work on, you know, 5 of them do one type of change and the other 5 do the other type, and then just kind of do some basic stats on the overall ROI from the type of work you did. And over time, as you do that kind of research and isolated variables, you'll start to get a pretty good understanding of what work is worth the time and what work isn't. So I'd say get more scientific, do a better job controlling specific variables you're testing for. Nice interpretation of the guide. Thank you, Terry. I've heard Gary Isles explain HTTPS is a tiebreaker. Yeah, I'd say that's about what it amounts to is, if you're within 1% of somebody else, that's what it is now. But in the early days, it was measurable. Like there's about 4 to 6 weeks where we could measure the correlations that HTTPS brought to the table. And those went away once everybody started doing it. The correlations evaporated.
One thing I will say that I saw, this is field data, when Verizon went from HTTP to HTTPS, migration went perfectly. We saw absolutely no change in our traffic in any way, shape, or form. That was a large site, went from HTTP HTTPS. So you would imagine that we would have broken a couple ties occasionally. Maybe we weren't tying with anybody, but
now, did they do it in the first month that everybody was rushing to do it? Because
no,
if they
did
didn't do it
yeah.
then, it was too late to see the benefit.
I think this was like July of 2016 or something like that. So it definitely
so
wasn't
late to the game, no impact. Yeah, I agree.
I think my point is I'm not saying you shouldn't be HTTPS, be HTTPS, because if you're not HTTPS, you're going to get, some browsers are going to throw warnings and say things are unsafe. But don't do it because you think it's a ranking factor. Do it for other better reasons.
Yeah, JM3 says, I just knock out all the Quora recommendations. Sometimes I get boost, others nothing happens. I tend to I'll do that if it's an unimportant page. Like I'll just knock it out blindly, get it done. 10-minute problem. But if I'm actually trying to learn things, then I don't do the whole Quora thing. I will actually itemize and go, let's see what this type of factor does all on its own. Because I'll want to learn what things are worthwhile to do. And so I highly recommend that you try to learn, you try to use a little bit of scientific method in the work you do. And I know that's hard and it slows things down a little, but as SEOs, we have to master our craft. And if you don't do any testing or experimentation, I mean, how well can you master your craft? So I would find a safe place to do that and to learn new things. All right. That's it, everyone. Thank you so much.
Good job.